disruptions happening across industries, companies are investing in technology initiatives to invent new businesses, models, and drive efficiencies in their business. There is no doubt that technology has enabled the creations of world's most valuable companies. For our keynote session, we warmly welcome Mr. Nandan Nilekani as he shares his insights about the adaptive advantage that businesses of future need to have. The media partner of this session is Entrepreneur India. Mr. Nilekani is the co-founder and chairman of Infosys Technologies Limited. He is the founding chairman of Unique Identification Authority of India. Most recently, Mr. Nilekani co-founded and is the chairman of ASCENT, a not-for-profit to create learner-centric technology-based platform to improve basic literacy and numeracy of millions of children. He has won many accolades over the year. In 2006, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan. He was also named Businessman of the Year by Forbes Asia. Times magazine listed him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2006 and 2009. Mr. Nilekani is the author of Imagining India and co-author of Rebooting India, Realizing a Billion Aspirations. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. It is such an honor to have you here. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, and it's wonderful to be speaking here at this ASCENT eConclave, and I want to thank Mr. Harsh Mariwala for inviting me and giving me the privilege of speaking and giving this keynote address. Given the topic of decoding disruption, I'd like to speak about what happened with the pandemic, how it changed our business in so many ways, as well as a lot of the developments on the digital side. Obviously, the pandemic had huge amount of personal consequences for all of us. Many of us got sick. We lost a few loved ones, and we have had to live in this whole way of staying at home and social distancing and all that. But it also had a tremendous impact on business. For example, one of the big changes that happened was the need to work from home, because you couldn't really go and be in proximity of your colleagues. And we learned that at Infosys, where between March, around say third week of March was when the lockdown was put. Within a matter of weeks, less than 4 weeks, we had over 250,000 employees in 40 countries working remotely from home. And that was an example of the adaptability of the organization. And that adaptability came about because the networks were already in place, because everybody had a computer which they could take home, because Infosys had invested in laptops, and also the network security was strong enough to have employees working from home. So those underlying investments in creating a network which was agile and secure, and in the capital to be able to log in from home, also allowed the company to accelerate the work from home, and they were able to do that in a matter of weeks and then deliver to the customers. And that has largely been the way of working for the last 18 months. So I think that was a great test of adaptability. And of course, many companies around the world have done that. And we have learned to work from home. We have learned to connect all our meetings on video conferencing. We have learned to come together on other collaborative platforms to create documents together, to write software together. So I think the change to working from home has been one of the defining moments of this pandemic. And it has also raised the question of what will happen actually when things fully come back to some kind of normalcy. And people absolutely expect that we will have a hybrid way of working, where some of us will work from home, some will work in the office. All of us may come to the office on some days, some of us may never go in the office. So there are all kinds of variations. I don't think anybody really has an understanding of what is going to be the ultimate equilibrium point of hybrid work in the future. But the future of work has changed dramatically, it has also demonstrated that a lot more work can be done remotely than we thought possible. So doctors learned to do teleconsultation online, people learned how to order online, grandmothers spoke to their grandchildren online. So suddenly this has had a massive behavior change, which has implications which I'll come back to a little later. But some of the other implications on business from the pandemic has been digital acceleration. Because one thing the pandemic showed is that those companies which were digitally strong, which had digital options to do their business, they were able to do well. For example, if you look at the retail industry, many companies that relied only on physical stores got into issue, and many companies in the US in the retail industry, including great names, went into bankruptcy. But companies that had a very good omni-channel presence where they could sell not only in the store, but they could sell online, they could have the stuff delivered home, or you could come to the store and pick it up, or you could do a curbside pickup from the parking lot and so on. Those companies did well. And in fact, in the US, companies like Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and Lowe's did extremely well. And that was only because they had a far superior digital omni-channel strategy. And this happened in every industry. So in every industry, those companies that were more digitally savvy, which had built better systems over the years, were able to perform better in the pandemic. And the realization has dawned on the managements and leaders of companies around the world sitting in every boardroom that digital acceleration is a must. And so I think we are seeing the consequences of that, where all of the world boards are discussing how to make the companies much more digitally native. And this actually is a long trend which we have seen. What happened was way back, 15 years back, the technology drivers of the world were enterprises, so businesses using technology. But with the arrival of the smartphone, with the iPhone coming in 2007 and then the Android phone from Google in 2008-9, the center of gravity of technological innovation has gone to applications led by the smartphone. And for the first time, we have a technology where billions of users around the world are using these devices. And that has led to many, many implications. For example, it has led to the rise of the cloud, where now we have these huge clouds which offer all services, and you don't have to go and buy your own hardware and software. You can just connect to a cloud and start using it. It has led to what is called the consumerization of user experience, where consumers are used to being able to just tap on the phone and use applications. And businesses have had to struggle to make their legacy applications as consumer friendly as the consumer applications that their employees and customers were used to. So that was the other big trend. Then, of course, there was the whole big data, where many billions of transactions created a lot of data. And initially, you had all kinds of analytics possible on that data. And now people are applying AI and machine learning to data to get insights. So the whole idea of being able to drive your business not on gut feel or on customer surveys, but actually on real-time data and being able to understand customer preferences and what will sell, what will not sell, and so on. So big data, analytics, AI has been a huge trend. And another important trend which came out was the need to modernize these systems. Many companies had decade-old systems that had to be modernized, and the pandemic has accelerated that modernization. And then there's been the whole issue of cybersecurity, because if companies are going to expose their internal systems to the internet, then they have to be absolutely sure that nobody can hack their way into it. So cybersecurity has become a very important development. And then platforms like, the big platforms have shown that platform thinking is very important. So all these trends were there. They began, maybe in 2014, 15, and companies started adopting them. But the digital acceleration meant that all these systems had to be done even faster. And that's what we have seen in the pandemic. The other impact of the pandemic has clearly been disruption of supply chain, both for people and for goods. We have seen that what's happened with the goods supply chain, there's not enough staff in airports or ports. There's not enough ships out there. There are not enough containers out there. There are not enough, everything has been upset. And so there's going to take some time for the whole supply chain disruption to fall into place. And therefore, the same thing has happened on the people side. If you are a today, because the travel has been in many countries, especially the so-called zero COVID countries, have made it quite difficult to go in and out. And therefore, the old model of people flying around for meetings or even for work has come to a grinding halt. And therefore, companies have to cope with that. So I think this is something which has made a dramatic change. And then, of course, there's a whole geopolitical change which is coming, which, some amount of reaction to globalization. So the pace of globalization is slowing down. There's the geopolitical issue of US and China, which has an impact on every business. So all these things are things that we in business have to deal with. But India is really a bright spot in the digital story, because today India has 3 different developments which are going to have an impact on India's growth and economic recovery. The first is that the digital acceleration and demand created by the pandemic has created a huge amount of growth opportunity for India's technology companies. And they are all growing at double digits, and they are all sounding very optimistic about the future. They're talking about a multi-year cycle of investment into digital technology. People like Satya Nadella have said that the world spending on technology is going to move from 5% of GDP to 10% of GDP globally in the next decade or so, which means there's going to be a huge amount of investment of technology and people into digital transformation. And in India, Indian companies are benefiting from that. India has not only global tech companies like Infosys, it also has the remote development centers of a JP Morgan or a Intel. It has the startups. So there's a huge amount of activity. And it's estimated that the number of people in the IT services and BPO industry are about 4.5 million. And that is expected to double in the next several years. Imagine it took us about 40 years to get to about 4.5 million people, but doubling that to 9 to 10 million will happen in maybe a decade. And therefore, this is going to create massive jobs opportunities in the tech industry. And what we know is that the tech industry in turn hires other people. So, every job you create in the tech industry creates 4 or 5 jobs in ancillary industries, in transportation, in food, in real estate, as people build housing and offices. So one big driver we're going to see in the coming years is the tech industry growing already from a large base of about $200 billion. If they grow at double digits, then you can imagine the impact of that on the country. The second thing is something which all of you are part of and all of you are seeing, which is the dramatic explosion in startups. Many of the startups are now doing an IPO, very successful IPOs, and we have seen how Zomato and Nykaa have done so well in the capital markets. And we also seen the rapid birth of unicorns, or companies with a valuation of more than $1 billion. Just to give you a context, the total number of unicorns in India is approximately 80 to 85. And just in the last 11 months, we have had 40 new unicorns, or around 40, which means half the unicorns in India were born in the last 11 months. So you can see that the whole pace of change of startups is going up. Now, this means there are many reasons for that. Of course, a lot of capital is coming into India. There have been some regulatory changes in China, which have made global capital come to India. So there's enormous amounts of capital coming. There are new investors coming who take very quick decisions on investment. We have great entrepreneurs in India who are able to sell their vision. And so we see a huge amount of activity. And this is going to be a big driver in the coming years, because these companies are going to create jobs, going to transform businesses. They're going to go public, and they're really going to make an impact on the country. So the second big driver is the startups. And the third driver in the digital economy of India is the digital public goods that India has created. I was involved with them as the chairman of the UIDAI. I led the creation of Aadhaar, and now 1.3 billion people have digital identity. And that is so foundational and transformational that it's made an impact on everyone, where they can use that to get the money into the bank account, withdraw money from the bank account, open a bank account, get a mobile connection, invest in the stock market. Everything you can do now digitally and virtually using Aadhaar, eKYC, and all that. So that's one big piece of the digital infrastructure that India has created. The second big piece has been the UPI, which is an amazing innovation from the National Payment Corporation of India, which has built the UPI platform as a very advanced, mobile-first, high-volume, low-cost transaction platform. This platform was launched barely 5 years back in May of 2016. And by October 2016, it had only reached about 100,000 transactions. And last month, in October, it did over 4.3 billion transactions of a total transaction value of $100 billion. So this has had a dramatic impact. And I can see that when I go out, every vegetable seller, every coconut seller, every small shop is taking UPI payments. And that's really been a revolution. And the third thing which is coming, which will also have an impact on the recovery, is something called the account aggregator network, which essentially India will be the only country in the world where individuals and businesses will have access to their own data. They'll be empowered with their own data. And there are many, many use cases for that. But the first big use case will be democratized lending, and borrowers, be it businesses or individuals, will be able to use their own digital footprint and get access to credit. So if I'm a small business, I can use the data of my purchases or my sales or my taxes paid and share the data with the lender on a secure basis. And the lender can make an instant decision to give me a loan. So we're going to see a huge recovery in the economy through account aggregator infrastructure. And right now, that system is doing a few thousand transactions, but there's no reason why in a few years it won't do millions of transactions in a day. And that will completely change the economy, because unlike in the old model where a few large companies got credit, with this model, every small kirana store, every small dispensary, every small manufacturing company will get credit. So this democratization of credit will drive job creation and economic growth. So all these digital platforms that India has, there are many, many more of them, which I won't spend time now. But fundamentally, all these platforms that India is going to lead to economic activity. So there are three drivers. Almost the doubling of people in the IT industry from 4.5 million to say 9-10 million in the coming years, the rapid growth of startups with almost something like 40 unicorns coming up this year, and the fact that India has the best digital public infrastructure anywhere in the world, and that becomes the foundation for transformation both of the public and the private sector. So we're going to see all these things coming together in a big way. We're also seeing a big push on sustainability. Recently, there was the COP26 at Glasgow, and all countries, Prime Minister Modi talked about net zero by 2070. We at Infosys have been actually leaders in sustainability with massive reduction in consumption of water, power, recycling, rainwater harvesting, you name it. And in 2020, Infosys became among the first companies in the world to achieve carbon neutrality 30 years ahead of the Paris commitment of 2050. And today, sustainability is part of a larger movement called ESG, E for environment, S for social, and G for governance. And ESG is now becoming very important, and companies are expected to improve their sustainability goals. Companies are expected to be good social citizens and practice good governance. And ESG, and many, many investors today are demanding ESG. So we see a big push on sustainability and how to reduce consumption of everything, how to create, use more renewables. At Infosys, about almost half the power is from a renewable plant that we have in Karnataka, which generates 30-40 megawatts of solar power. People are going to go into more and more circular economy, where rather than creating waste, you recycle everything. So many of these things are happening. And digital is going to be a big part of making this happen, because to be able to really get to this, we need very high granular data, which can only be done thanks to all the sensors which will be there in our smart buildings and in our power systems. And therefore, digital will actually help the whole movement of the whole sustainability drive that is going to become a big thing in the world. Now, all these are what's happening in the world, but how do companies deal with this? And that's why I think how do we make our own companies adaptive is very, very important. I gave you an example in the beginning of how the Infosys investment in a sophisticated network, in cybersecurity, in capital equipment, allowed it to switch to working from home in a matter of weeks and was able to bounce back. And that is an example of an adaptable company which invests in that. And therefore, one thing that will require adaptability is that every company will have a very state-of-the-art digital spine which connects employees, customers, investors, the finances, everything is on this digital spine. And many of the big things happening in the world is how companies are reinventing the infrastructure to create a digital spine. And this is something which we are seeing around the world. And at Infosys, we have been on this journey for several years. And we also believe in a quick turnaround. So we have releases every 6 weeks so that we're able to completely transform our digital infrastructure. And that's something that's very, very important for adaptability, because part of creating a digital spine is to be very quick in reacting to changes in the market. And therefore, we call that as sentience, the ability to sense the changes in the market. And that is something which is done at Infosys, and many companies are trying to make their systems very, very adaptable. The important thing in strategy now is not necessarily about doing A or B, because the whole changes happening in the world are so complex that we can't predict where A will happen or B will happen. The challenge is to design a system which is flexible enough to do A or B, depending on the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And therefore, part of an adaptive organization is optionality, being able to choose different paths no matter what happens. A good example of that is in our industry has been the push towards localization. Localization meant that you hire more and more people in the countries where you operate. A company like Infosys operates in about 40 countries and is now hiring in those countries. And that optionality was very useful because when the pandemic struck, many countries actually stopped the movement of people in and out of their countries. So you could not enter Australia, for example, or China. And therefore, the fact that you had employees there and could hire more people there actually allowed you to grow your business in spite of the fact that people could not move around. And Infosys today hires thousands of people in the US, in Mexico, in Canada. And all this localization not only is a good thing from a diversity perspective as you create jobs and become part of a truly diverse multicultural company, it also creates adaptability to changing things in the market. We're also seeing what is looking like a global war for talent. I talked about the fact that digital is going to be big. So the digital needs will be there by existing companies, IT companies, by end user companies, the banks, by startups, by the offshore development centers of global companies. Everyone is going to need technology people. And therefore, there is going to be a global war for talent. And therefore, a company's HR practices, how will it teach the employees, how will it recognize their accomplishments, how meritocratic it is, how it creates a culture of bonding, all these things are going to become very, very important as we go along. And therefore, I think a people-first strategy is going to be very important. And I think that is something that we're going to see. And the pandemic has made that all the more important. And you're seeing that in the attrition levels of companies where people are leaving and going for better prospects. You're seeing this in this movement called the Great Resignation, where many people are actually opting out of working or trying to take off for some time. And so there's a big reshuffle going on in the work area where people are changing. And I think companies, whether small or large, will have to take stock of this and do what is required. So that is another big thing which is going to happen. And then there's the whole issue of adaptability will come from a culture of continuous learning. It's important to realize that each of us cannot afford to remain stagnant or static in what we do. We have to constantly learn and be on top of developments. And therefore, companies will have to make a big investment in creating a learning culture, creating platforms for learning, creating content for learning, creating a way of recognizing that people have learned something, which is called giving them the credentials, linking their promotion and compensation to how much they learn. There's a whole thing required to create a learning platform for everybody. And I believe that's something which we're going to see even more. And, the Indian IT industry is a good example of how they have used learning to pivot from time to time. If you go back and look at the last 30 years, there have been many, many technological changes in the technology services industry. In the early 90s, we saw that people moving from using mainframes and mini computers to going to client server computing. And then towards the end of the last century, we saw a massive rush, both because of the Y2K issue, as well as the dot-com boom, which led to huge investment in, again, the first generation of startups and technology. And then after the global financial crisis of 2008, there was a massive push to reduce costs. So companies started trying to see how to reduce their technology spending. And today, we are seeing the COVID-inspired digital transformation that requires all our people to have digital skills and be able to help our clients grow by building new systems. So every few years, there has been a technology shift. Similarly, every few years, there has been a shift in the power of computing. Moore's law has been playing now for almost 30 years, and the chips are getting more and more powerful, and you can do more things. You can do more video, you can do games, you can do all kinds of things. So you have to keep on updating yourself with all these changes. And similarly, the networks are changing. Every 10 years, we have a change where we go to a new generation of technology. Last 10 years has been the era of 4G. India has been a world leader in 4G thanks to people like Jio, Airtel, and Vodafone Idea. And now the big thing is 5G, and the 5G investment cycle has just begun. And the next decade is going to see a massive rollout of 5G networks, which apart from giving high speed, will also give low latency and many other benefits that will lead to a whole new possible applications. So what it means is that, and this is just what's happening in the technology and digital field, but in every field, things are changing very rapidly. And we need the ability to quickly pivot ourselves, our businesses, and our people to these new opportunities. And therefore, more and more companies will invest in creating the infrastructure for learning. At Infosys, we have a very sophisticated platform called Lex, which allows any of our people anywhere in the world using any device to get access to learning content, short-term or long-term, do self-learning or assisted learning, and make sure that they get credits for that. So every company has to think of itself as a learning organization. And then let me say that it's also about how do we connect the dots. Today, the changes in the world are so many that you have to be able to sense all these mega trends and figure out how the dots can be connected. And then how can you then get your company in position for where the things will be a few years from now. So this is again very, very important, being able to do that. An example of that at Infosys is something called Cobalt, which is our cloud offering. And very early, about 3-4 years back, we realized the need that global clients will need someone to help them to migrate to the cloud, to transform their workloads, and to go multi-cloud or hybrid cloud or poly-cloud, where you have multiple clouds and you're able to move your workload and your data between those clouds. Now, when we thought about this, that was not really a trend yet, and people thought we were, wondering what they're talking about. But today, every global client is talking about how to go to multi-cloud for risk reasons, or for, economic reasons or whatever. So being able to sort of see where the future is going is very, very important. And all of us have to build that ability to look at the future and figure out how things can be done. And therefore, connecting the dots is very important because there's so many things happening at the same time. There is the digital revolution acceleration I talked about. There's the whole push towards sustainability and net zero, which we talked about. There is the impact of the pandemic and how business will change in the future of work. And this may not be the last pandemic because there may be something else that comes. So it really the whole medical situation. And then there's this massive migration of renewable technology where we're going to go after 100 years of being in the hydrocarbon world. In the matter of next 40, 50 years, we're going to migrate our global infrastructure to green energy, be it renewables like wind and solar or fuels like green hydrogen. And this is going to affect everyone and every supply chain and every strategic decision that you make. For example, in the era of hydrocarbons, maybe the big place where oil is Saudi Arabia and the big place where gas is Qatar. But in the new world, where the raw material of renewables is going to be metals like cobalt and lithium. The cobalt is in Congo, DRC Congo, and the lithium is in Chile. Suddenly your supply chains are going to change. So having a view of how all these various things are going to play and how they all come together is very, very important. And I would urge you to think about it. So finally, I think, let me end by saying that at one level, this can be a bit forbidding, but actually it's very exciting because those companies that are innovative, and a lot of this is innovation driven, those companies that are agile, those companies that are able to connect the dots and predict the future, or not predict the future, but at least get a sense of what is the optionality they need to build in, those companies are going to flourish. So we cannot change the external world around us. There's too much happening. But we can change ourselves and our organizations to be more agile, more adaptable, more lit, more in a learning mode, more ability to connect the dots, more collaborative. And it is those investments we make in ourselves as companies and individuals that will really give us long-standing, long-standing hope and long-standing business viability. Because we have seen, I mean, the history is there that companies don't last that many decades. Companies tend to, many companies are often at the top and then something happens and then they get on the decline. And therefore, we also have to make sure that we are never complacent, because we always have to be absolutely humble and be willing to learn. We should not become arrogant. We should be open-minded and be willing to learn. We must encourage young people because they have ideas that will be of a different level, and really create a culture which is buzzing with energy, buzzing with ideas, buzzing with collaboration, and make sure that our antenna are always up there, figuring out where a company should go. So I think we are living in a world of great disruption on multiple fronts, but it's also an era of great opportunity. It's going to create a lot of new leaders, and I do hope many of them will be from all of you. So once again, all the best, and I'm delighted to be speaking at the ASCENT Conclave, and I'm grateful to Mr. Mariwala for giving me a chance to address you. Thank you all.